This is a public domain reading of On the Cross, a romance of the Passion Play at Oberammergau by Wilhelmine von Hillern. Chapter 5. Modern Pilgrims. What do you think? The Countess von Wildenau is founding an orphan's home, said the prince, as, leaving the gross house, he joined a group of gentlemen who were waiting just outside the door in the little garden. The news created a sensation. The gentlemen, laughing and jesting, plied him with questions. Oh, mon Dieu, who can understand a woman? Our goddess is sitting in the peasant's living room with the elderly daughters of the house, indescribable creatures, occupying herself with feminine work. Her Highness, Countess Wildenau, oh, that's a bad joke. No, upon my honour, if she had not hung a veil over the window, we could see her sitting there. She has borrowed a calico apron from one of the ladies of the house, and as, for want of a maid, she was obliged to arrange her hair herself, she wears it today in a remarkably simple style and looks. He kissed his hand to the empty air. More bewitching than ever, like a girl of 16, a regular Gretchen. Whoever has not gone crazy over her when she has been in full dress will surely do so if he sees her thus. Aha! We must see her too, will assail the window, cried his companions enthusiastically. No, no, for heaven's sake don't do that, on pain of her anger. Prince Hohenheim, I beg you. Count Cossini, don't knock. Stand Genois. Au nom de Dieu, she will never forgive you. Why not, friends so intimate as we are? I have already said, who can depend upon a woman's whims? Let me explain. I entered, rejoicing in the thought of bringing her such pleasant news. I said, guess whom I met just now at the ticket office, Countess? The goddess sat sewing. There was a general cry of astonishment. Sewing? The prince went on. Of course, without a thimble, for those in the house did not fit, and there was none among her Highness' trinkets. So I repeated my question. An icy, how can I tell? Was the depressing answer, as if at that moment nothing in the world could possibly interest her more than her work. So, unasked, and with no display of attention, I was forced to go on with my news. Just think, Countess, Prince Hohenheim, the Counts Cossini, Wenenrode, Stangernois, all Austria, France and Bavaria have arrived. I joyously exclaimed. I expected that she would utter a sigh of relief at the thought of meeting men of her world again, but no! She greeted my tidings with a frown. Here, here, cried the group. A frown. I was forced to persist. They are outside, waiting to throw themselves at your feet, I added, a still darker frown. Please keep the gentlemen away. I can see no one. I will see no one. So she positively announced. I timidly ventured to ask why. She was tired. She could receive no one. She had no time. At last it came out. What do you suppose the Countess did yesterday? I dare not guess, replied Stangernois with a malicious glance at the prince, which the latter loftily ignored. She sent me away at 11 o'clock, and then went wandering about, rhapsodizing over the moonlight with her host, old Gross. A universal peal of laughter greeted these words. Countess Wildenau, for lack of an escort, obliged to wander about with an old stone-cutter. Yes, and she availed herself of this virtuous ramble to save the life of a despairing girl, who very opportunely attempted to commit suicide just at the time the Countess was passing to rescue this precious prize. Now she is sitting yonder, remodelling one of her charming tailor costumes for this last toy of her caprice. She declares that she loves the wench most tenderly, will never be separated from her. In short, she is playing the novel character of Lady Bountiful, and does not want to be disturbed. Did you see the fair orphan? No, she protested that it would be unpleasant for the girl to expose herself to curious glances, so she conceals this very sensitive young lady from profane eyes in her sleeping room. What do you say to all this, Prince? I say, replied Prince Hohenheim, an elderly gentleman with a clearly cut, sarcastic face, a bald forehead, and a low but distinct enunciation, that a vivacious, imaginative woman is always influenced by the environment in which she happens to find herself. When the Countess is in the society of scholarly people, she becomes extremely learned. If she is in a somewhat frivolous circle, like ours, she grows. Not exactly frivolous, but full of sparkling wit. And here, among these devout enthusiasts, Her Highness wishes to play the part of a stylite. Let us indulge her. It won't last long. A lady's whim must never be thwarted. Ce que femme veut, Dieu le veut. Ah, hey you were. But is he? Has the Countess also made a vow to fast? asked Count Cossini of the Austrian embassy, and therefore briefly called Austria. Could we not dine together? No, she told me that she would not leave the beloved suicide alone a moment at present, and therefore she intended to dine at home. Yesterday she shuddered at the bare thought of drinking a cup of tea made in that witch's kitchen, and only the fact that my valet prepared it, and I drank it first in her presence, finally induced her, at 10 o'clock last evening, to accept the refreshment. And today she will eat a dinner prepared by the ladies of the house. There must really be something dangerous in the air of Ammergau. To persons of the Countess' temperament, yes, replied Prince Hohenheim in his calm manner, then slipping his arm through the prince's a moment, whispered confidentially as they walked on. I advise you, Prince Emil, to get her away as soon as possible. Certainly, all the arrangements are made. We shall start directly after the performance. That is fortunate. Tomorrow, then, you have tickets. Oh yes, and what is still better, whole bones. That's true, cried Austria. What a crowd! One might think Sarah Bernhardt was going to play the Virgin Mary. It's ridiculous. I haven't seen such a spectacle since the Paris Exposition, remarked Sturgeois. It's worse than Baden. Baden at the time of the races, muttered Wengenrode angrily. Absurd. What brings the people here? Why, we are here too, said Hohenheim, smiling. Mon Dieu, it must be seen once if people are in the neighbourhood, observed Cossini. Are you going directly after the performance too? Asked Prince Emil. Of course. What is there to do here? No gaming, no lady society, and just think, the burgomaster of Ammergau will allow neither a circus nor any other ordinary performance. He was offered 40,000 marks by the proprietor of the Circus Rauenet if he would permit him to give performances during the Passion Play. Mademoiselle Rauenet told me so herself. Do you suppose that obstinate, stiff-necked Philistine could be persuaded? No, it was not in harmony with the dignity of the Passion Play. He preferred to refuse the 40,000 marks. The Salon Kluber wanted to put up an elegant merry-go-round and offered 12,000 marks for the privilege. Heaven forbid! I believe these people have the mania of ambition, said Wenenrode. Say rather of saintship, corrected Prince Hohenheim. Aye, they all consider themselves the holy personages whom they represent. We need only look at this arrogant burgomaster and the gentleman who personates Christ to understand what these people imagine themselves. All joined in the laugh which followed. Yes, said Wengenrode, and the Roman procurator, Pilate, who is a porter or a messenger and so drags various loads about, carried up my luggage today and dropped my dressing case containing a number of breakable jars and boxes. Stupid blockhead, I exclaimed angrily. He straightened himself and looked at me with an expression which actually embarrassed me. My name is Thomas Renner, sir. I beg your pardon for my awkwardness, and am ready to make your loss good, so far as my means shall allow. Now tell me, isn't that sheer hallucination of grandeur? Some of the gentlemen laughed, but Prince Emil and Hohenheim were silent. Where shall we go to tomorrow evening in Munich to recompense ourselves for this boredom? Asked Cossini. To the casino, I think, said the prince. Well, then we'll all meet there, shall we? The party assented. Provided that the Countess has no commands for us, observed Saint-Genois. She will not have any, said the prince. For either the play will produce an absurd impression which is not to be expected, and then she will feel ashamed and unwilling to grant us our triumph because we predicted it, or her sentimental mood will draw from this farce a sweet poison of emotion, and in that case we shall be too frivolous for her. This must first be allowed to exhale. Very true, Hohenheim assented. You are just the man to cope with this capricious beauty, Prince Emil. Adieu, may you prosper. The gentlemen raised their hats. Farewell, said Cossini. By the way, I'll make a suggestion. We shall best impress the Countess while in this mood by our generosity. Let us heap coals of fire on her head by sending a telegram to the court gardener to convert the whole palace into a floral temple to welcome her return. It will touch a mysterious chord of sympathy if she meets only these mute messengers of our adoration. When on entering she finds this surprise and remembers how basely she treated us this morning, her heart will be touched, and she will invite us to dine the day after tomorrow. A capital plan, cried Wenenrode and Saint-Genois gaily. Do your highnesses agree? Certainly, replied Hohenheim with formal courtesy. When the point in question is a matter of gallantry, a Hohenheim is never backward. I beg to be allowed to contribute also, but incognito. She would regard such an attention from me as a piece of sentimentality, and it would produce just the contrary effect, Prince Emil answered. As you please. Let us go to the telegraph office, cried Wengenrode eagerly. Farewell, gentlemen. Au revoir, Prince Emil. Are you going to return to the lioness's den? Can you ask? Questioned Hohenheim with a significant smile. Then early tomorrow morning at the play, and at night the casino, don't forget," Cosigny called back. The gentlemen, laughing and chatting, strolled down the street to their lodgings. The prince watched them a moment, turned, and went back to the countess. "I cannot really be vexed with her, if these associates do not satisfy her," he thought. "Should I desire her to become my wife, if they did? Certainly not. Yet if women only would not rush from one extreme to another. Hohenheim is perfectly right. She ought not to stay here too long. She must go tomorrow." He had reached the house and entered the neglected old garden where huge, gnarled fruit trees, bearing small, stunted fruit, interlaced their branches above a crooked bench. There, in the midst of the rank grass and weeds, sat the countess, her beautiful head resting against the mouldy bark of the old trunk, gazing thoughtfully at the luminous mountains gleaming in the distance through the tangled boughs and shrubbery. From the adjoining garden of the sculptor's wink, whose site was somewhat higher, a Diana carved in white stone gazed curiously across, seeming as if she wished to say to the pensive lady, who at that moment herself resembled a statue, "Art will create gods for you everywhere." But the temptation had no effect. The countess seemed to have had no luck with these gods. She no longer believed in them. "Well, Countess Madeleine, did the light and air lure you out of doors?" asked the prince, joyfully approaching her. "Oh, I could not bear to stay there any longer. Herr Gross' daughters are finishing the dress. We will dine here, Prince. The meal can be served on a table near the house, under a wild grape vine arbor. We can wait on ourselves for one day." "For one day?" repeated the prince with great relief. "Oh yes, it can be managed for one day." Thank heaven, she had no intention of staying here. "Oh, Prince, see how beautiful, how glorious it is." "Beautiful, glorious? Pardon me, but I see nothing to call forth words you so rarely use. You must have narrowed your demands if, after the view of the wondrous garden of the Isola Bella and all the Italian villas, you suddenly take delight in cabbage, stalks, wild pears, broom, and colt's foot." "Now see how you talk again," replied the countess, unpleasantly affected by his words. "Does not Spinoza say, everything is beautiful, and as I lose myself in the observation of its beauty, my pleasure in life is increased?" That has not been your motto hitherto. You have usually found something to criticize in every object. It seems to me that you have wearied of the beautiful and now, by way of a change, find even ugliness fair. Very true, my friend. I am satisfied. Nothing charms me, nothing satisfies me, not even the loveliest scene, because I always apply to everything the standard of perfection, and nothing attains it. She shook herself suddenly, as if throwing off a burden. This must not continue. The aesthetic intolerance which poisoned every pleasure must end. I will cast aside the whole load of critical analysis and academic ideas of beauty, and snap my fingers at the ghosts of Winckelmann and Lessing. Here in the kitchen garden, among cabbage stalks and colt's foot, wild pear and plum trees, fanned by the fresh, crystal-clear air of the lofty mountains, whose glaciers shimmer with a bluish light through the branches, in the silence and solitude, I suddenly find it beautiful. Beautiful, because I am happy. Because I am only a human being, free from every restraint, thinking nothing, feeling nothing save the peace of nature, the delight of this repose. She rested her feet comfortably on the bench, and, with her head thrown back, gazed with a joyous expression into the blue air which, after the rain, arched above the earth like a crystal bell. This mood did not quite please the prince. He was exclusively a man of the world. His thoughts were ruled by the laws of the most rigid logic. Whatever was not logically attainable had no existence for him. His enthusiasm reached the highest pitch only in the enjoyment of the noblest products of art and science. He did not comprehend how anyone could weary of them, even for a moment, on the one side, because his calm temperament did not, like the Countess's passionate one, exhaust everything by following it to its inmost core, and he was thus guarded from satiety, on the other, because he wholly lacked appreciation of nature and her unconscious grandeur. He was the trained vassal of custom in the conventional, as well as in every other province. The Countess, however, possessed some touch of that doctrine of divine right which is ready, at any moment, to cast off the bonds of tradition and artificial models, and obey the impulse of kinship with sovereign nature. This was the boundary across which he could not follow her, and he was perfectly aware of it, for he had one of those proud characters which disdain to deceive themselves concerning their own powers. Yet it filled him with grave anxiety. "What are you thinking of now, Prince?" asked his companion, noticing his gloomy mood. "That I have not seen you so contented for months, and yet I am unable to understand the cause of this satisfaction. especially when I remember what it usually requires to bring a smile of pleasure to your lips." "Dear me, must everything be understood?" cried the beautiful woman, laughing. "There is the pedant again. Must we be perpetually under the curb of self-control, and give ourselves an account whether what we feel in a moment of happiness is sensible and authorized? Must we continually see ourselves reflected in the mirror of our self-consciousness, and never draw a veil over our souls, and permit God to have one undiscovered secret in them?" The prince silently kissed her hand. His eyes now expressed deep, earnest feeling, and stirred by emotion. She laid her other hand upon his head. "You are a noble-hearted man, Prince, though some unspoken, uncomprehended idea stands between us. I know your feelings." Again the rose and the thorn. It was always so. At the very moment her soft, sweet hand touched him caressingly, she thrust a dagger into his heart. Aye, that was the continual misunderstanding which existed between them, the thorn in the every rose she proffered. Women like these are only tolerable when they really love, when a powerful feeling makes them surrender themselves completely. Where this is not the case, they are, unconsciously and involuntarily, malicious, dangerous creatures, caressing and slaying at the same moment. First, woe betide the man whom they believe they love, for how often such beings are mistaken in their feelings. Such delusions do not destroy the woman, she often experiences them, but the man who has shared them with her. Alas for him who has not kept a cool head. The prince was standing with his back turned to the street, gazing thoughtfully at the beautiful woman with the fathomless, sparkling eyes. Suddenly he saw her start and flush. Turning with the speed of lightning, he followed the direction of her glance, but saw nothing except the figure of a man of unusual height, with long black hair, pass swiftly around the corner and disappear. "Do you know that gentleman?" "No," replied the Countess frankly. "He is the person whom I saw yesterday as we drove up the mountain." "Pardon the indiscretion, but you blushed." "Yes, I felt it, but I don't know why," she answered with an almost artless innocence in her gaze. The prince could not help smiling. "Countess, Countess," he said, shaking his finger at her, as if she were a child. "Guard your imagination, it will prove a traitor some day." The Countess, as if with a sweet consciousness of guilt, drew down the uplifted hand with a movement of such indescribable grace that no one could have remained angry with her. The prince knelt at her feet an instant, not longer than a blade of grass requires to bend before the breeze and rise again. Then he stood erect, somewhat paler than before, but perfectly calm. "I'll go in and tell my valet to serve our dinner here." "If you please, Prince," replied the lady, gazing absently down the street. Andreas Gross entered the garden. "Everything is settled, Your Highness." "I have talked with Josepha's relatives and guardian, and they will be very glad to have you take her. All, even the Christ Friar?" "Certainly, there is no objection." She had expected something more, and looked at the old man as if for the rest of the message, but he added nothing. "Ought not Friar to come here, in order to discuss the particulars with me?" she asked at last, almost timidly. "Why, he goes to see no one, as I told you, and he surely would not come to speak of Josepha, for he is ashamed of her. He says that whatever you do will be satisfactory to him." "Very well," replied the Countess, in a somewhat disappointed tone. "What a comical tête-à-tête!" a laughing voice suddenly exclaimed behind the fence. The Countess started up, but it was too late for escape. She was caught. A lady, young and elegantly dressed, accompanied by two older ones, eagerly rushed up to her. "Dear Countess, why have you hidden yourself here at the farthest corner of the village? We have searched all Amergau for you. Your coat of arms on the carriage and your liveries at the old post-house betrayed you." Yes, yes, when people want to travel incognito, they must not journey with genuine Wildenau elegance. We were more cautious. We came in a modest hired conveyance. But what a life this is! I was obliged to sleep on straw last night. "Hear and shudder! On straw! Did you have a bed? You have been here since yesterday." "Why, Your Highness, pray take breath. Good morning, Baroness. Good morning, Your Excellency." The Countess von Wildenau greeted all the ladies somewhat absently, yet very cordially. "Will you condescend to sit on this bench?" "Oh, you must sit here too." "No, it is not large enough. I am already seated." She had taken her seat on the root of a tree, with her face turned toward the street, in which she seemed to be deeply interested. The ladies were accommodated on the bench, and then followed a conversation which no pen could describe. This, that, and the other thing, matters to which the Countess had not given a single thought. an account of everything the newcomers had heard about the Ammergau people, the appearance of the Christ, whom they had already met. A handsome man, very handsome, with magnificent hair and mysterious eyes. Not the head of Christ, but rather as one would imagine Faust or Odin. But there was no approaching him, he was so unsociable. Such a pity, it would have been so interesting to talk with him. Rumour asserted that he was in love with a noble lady. It was very possible, there was no other way of explaining his distant manner. Countess von Wildenau had become very quiet. The eyes bent upon the street had an expression of actual suffering in their depths. Prince Emil stood in the doorway, mischievously enjoying the situation. It was a just punishment for her capricious whims that now, after having so insolently refused to see her friends, she should be compelled to listen to this senseless chatter. At last, however, he took pity on her and sent out his valet with the tablecloth and plates. "Oh, it is your dinner hour." The lady started up, and Her Highness raised her lorgnette. "Ah, Prince Emil's valet, so the faithful Toggenburg is with you." "Certainly, ladies," said a voice from the door as the prince came forward. "Only I was too timid to venture into such a dangerous circle." Peals of laughter greeted him. Yes, the Prince of Metten-Barnheim timid. At present I am merely the representative of Countess Wildenau's discharged courier, whose office, with my usual devotion, I am trying to fill, and doing everything in my power to escape the fate of my predecessor. "That of being sent away?" asked the Baroness somewhat maliciously. Countess Madeline cast a glance of friendly reproach at him. "How can you say such things, Prince? Your soup is growing cold," cried the Duchess. "Where does your Highness dine?" "At the house of one of the chorus singers, where we are lodging. A man with the bearing of an apostle and a blacksmith by trade. It is strange, all these people have a touch of ideality about them, and all this beautiful long hair. Haven't you walked through the village yet? Oh, you must. It's very odd, the people who throng around the actors in the Passion Play are types we shall not soon see again. I'm waiting eagerly for tomorrow. I hope our seats will be near. Farewell, dear Countess." The Duchess took the arm of the Prince, who escorted her to the garden gate. "I hope you will take care that the Countess, under the influence of the passion, doesn't enter a convent the day after tomorrow." "Your Highness forgets that I am an incorrigible heretic," laughed Madeleine Wildenau, kissing the two ladies in waiting, in her absence of mind, with a tenderness which they were at a loss to understand. The Prince accompanied the ladies a short distance away from the house, while Madeleine returned to Josepha, as if seeking in the society of the sorrowful, quiet creature rest from the noisy conversation. "Really, Countess von Wildenau has an oversupply of blessings. This magnificent widow's dower, the almost boundless revenue from the Wildenau estates, and a host of suitors," said the Baroness, after the Prince had taken leave to return to his idol. "Yes, but she will lose the revenue if she marries again," replied the Duchess. "The will was made in that way by Count Wildenau because his jealousy extended beyond the grave. I know all the particulars. She must either remain a widow or make a very brilliant match, for a woman of her temperament could never accommodate herself to more modest circumstances." "So she is not a good match?" asked Her Excellency. "Certainly not, for the will is so worded that on the day she exchanges the name of Wildenau for another, the estates, with the whole income, go to a side branch of the Wildenau family, as there are no direct heirs. It is enough to make one hate him, for the Wildenau cousins are extravagant and avaricious men who have already squandered one fortune. And the poor Countess will then have nothing except her personal property, a few diamonds, and whatever gifts she received from her husband." "Has she no private fortune?" asked the Baroness curiously. "You know that she was a Princess Prankenberg, and the financial affairs of the Prankenberg family are very much embarrassed. That is why the beautiful young girl was sacrificed at 17 to that horrible old Wildenau, who in return was forced to pay her father's debts," the Duchess explained. "Oh, so that's the way the matter stands," said Her Excellency, drawing a long breath. "Do her various admirers know it? All the gentlemen undoubtedly believe her to be immensely rich." "Oh, she makes no secret of these facts," replied the Duchess kindly. "She is sincere, that must be acknowledged, and she endured a great deal with her nervous old husband. We all know what he was. Everyone feared him, and he tyrannized over his wife. What was all her wealth and splendor to her? One ought not to grudge her a taste of happiness. She laid aside her widow's weeds as soon as possible. People thought that very suspicious," observed the Baroness in no friendly tone. That is exactly why I say she is better than her reputation, because she scorns falsehood and hypocrisy, replied the Duchess, leading the way across a narrow bridge. The two ladies in waiting, lingering a little behind, whispered, "She scorns falsehood and deception. Why, Your Excellency, her whole nature is treachery. She cannot exist a moment without acting some farce. With the pious, she is pious. With the liberals, she plays the liberal. She coquettes with every party to maintain her influence as ex-ambassadress. She cannot cease intriguing and plotting. Now she is once more assuming the part of youthful artlessness to bewitch this Prince Emil. Did you see that look of embarrassment just now, like a young girl? It is enough to make one ill. Yes. Just see how she has duped that handsome, clever prince, the heir of a reigning family too," lamented Her Excellency, who had daughters. "It is a shocking affair. He is seen everywhere with her, and yet there is no report of a betrothal. What do the men find in her? She captivates them all, young and old. There is no difference. And she is no longer even beautiful. She has faded, lost all her freshness. It is nothing but coquetry," answered the Baroness hastily, for the Duchess had stopped and was waiting for the ladies to overtake her. So they walked on in the direction of the Passion Theatre, where, on the morrow, they were to behold the God of Love, for whose sake they made this pious pilgrimage. "You were rightly served, Countess Madeleine," said the Prince, laughing, as they took their seats at the table. "You sent away your true friends and fell into the hands of these false ones." "The Duchess is not false," answered the Countess with a weary look. "She is noble in thought and act." "Like all who are in a position where they need envy no one," said the Prince, pushing aside with his spoon certain little islands of doubtful composition which were floating in the soup. "But believe me, with these few exceptions, no one save men deals sincerely with an admired woman. Women of the ordinary stamp cannot repress their envy. I should not like to hear what is being said of us by these friends on their way home." "What does it matter?" answered his companion, leaving her soup untasted. "Our poor diplomatic corps, which had anticipated so much pleasure in seeing you," the Prince began again. "I would almost like to ask you a favour, Countess." "What is it?" "That you will invite us to dine day after tomorrow. The gentlemen have resolved to avenge themselves nobly by offering you an ovation on your return to Munich tomorrow evening." "Indeed, what is it?" "I ought not to betray the secret, but I know that you do not like surprises. The Wildenau Palace will be transformed into a temple of flowers. Everything is already ordered. It is to be matchless, fairy-like." The speaker was secretly watching the impression made by his words. He must get her away from this place at any cost. The mysterious figure which had just called to her cheeks a flush for whose sake he would have sacrificed years of his life. Then he had noticed. Nothing escaped his keen eye and ear. Her annoyed, almost jealous expression when the lady spoke of the raven-locked Christ and his love for some high-born dame. She must leave this place ere the whim gained a firm hold. The worthy peasant performer might not object to the admiration of noble ladies, a pinchback theatre. Saint would hardly resist a Countess Wildenau, if she should choose to make him the object of an eccentric caprice. "It is very touching in the gentlemen," said the Countess. "Let us anticipate them and invite them to dine the day after tomorrow." "Ah, there spoke my charming friend. Now I am content with you. Will you permit me, at the close of this luxurious meal, to carry the joyous tidings to the gentlemen?" "Do so," she answered carelessly. "And when you have delivered the invitation, would you do me the favour to telegraph to my steward?" "Certainly." He pushed back the plate containing an unpalatable cutlet and drew out his notebook to make a memorandum. "What shall I write? Steward Gerris, Wildenau Palace, Munich. Day after tomorrow, Monday, dinner at 6 o'clock, 12 plates, 15 courses," dictated the Countess. "There, that is settled. But, Countess, 12 persons. Whom do you intend to invite? When I return the Duchess' visit, I will ask the 3 ladies, then Prince Hohenheim and Her Excellency's 2 daughters will make 12. But that will be terribly wearisome to the neighbours of Her Excellency's daughters. Yes, still, it can't be helped. I must give the poor girls a chance to make their fortune." "With the exception of Prince Hohenheim, you are all in the market," she said, smiling. "No one could speak so proudly save a Countess Wildenau, who knows that every other woman only serves as a foil," replied the Prince, kissing her hand with a significant smile. She was remarkably gracious that day. She permitted her hand to rest in his. There was a shade of apology in her manner. Apology for what? He had no occasion to ponder long. She was ashamed of having neglected a trusted friend for a chimera, a nightmare, which had assumed the form of a man with mysterious black eyes and floating locks. The lady's stories of the love affairs of the presumptive owner of these locks had destroyed the dream and broken the spell of the nightmare. Admirable, it had happened very opportunely. But, Countess, the gentleman will be disappointed if the ladies also come. Would it not be much pleasanter without them? You are far more charming and entertaining when you are the only lady present at our little smoking parties. We can have one later. The ladies will leave at 10. Then you others can remain. And who will be sent away next, when you are wearied by this après soirée? Who will be allowed to linger on a few minutes and smoke the last cigarette with you?" he added coaxingly. He looked very handsome at that moment. "We shall see," replied the Countess, and for the first time her voice thrilled with a warmer emotion. Her hand still rested in his, she had forgotten to withdraw it. Suddenly its warmth roused her, and his blue eyes flashed upon her a light as brilliant as the indiscreet glare which sometimes rouses a sleeper. She released it, and as the dinner was over, rose from the little table. "Will you go with me to call on the Duchess later?" she asked. "If so, I will dress now, while you give the invitation to the gentleman, and you can return afterward." "As you choose," replied the prince in an altered tone, for the slight variation in the lady's mood had not escaped his notice. "In half an hour, then. Farewell." Chapter 6. Evening before THEPLAY. Josepha sat in the Countess' room at work on her new dress. She was calm and quiet, the delight in finery which never abandons a woman to her latest hour. The poorest peasant, if still conscious, asks for a nicer cap when the priest comes to bring the last sacrament, had asserted its power in her. The Countess noticed it with pleasure. "Shall you finish it soon, Josepha? In an hour, your Highness." "Very well, I shall return about that time, and then we'll try the dress on." "Oh, your ladyship, it's a sin for me to put on such a handsome gown. Nobody will see me." "Not here, if you don't wish them to do so, but tomorrow evening we shall go to Munich, where you will begin a new life. And no brand upon your brow." Josepha kissed the Countess's hand. A few large tears rolled down on the dress which was to clothe the new creature. Then she helped her mistress to put on a walking toilette, performing her task skilfully and quickly. The latter fixed a long, thoughtful look upon her. "You are somewhat like your cousin, the Christ, are you not?" "So people say." "I suppose he sees a great many ladies. They all run after him, the high as well as the low. And it isn't the strangers only. The village girls are crazy over him too. He might have anyone he wanted. It seems as if he fairly bewitched the women. I heard that the reason for his secluded life was that he had a love affair with some noble lady." "Indeed," said Josepha carelessly, "I don't know anything about it. I don't believe it, though he would not tell me, even if it were true." "Oh, people talk about him so much, that's one reason for the envy. But his secluded life isn't on account of any noble lady. He has had nothing to say to anybody here since they refused to let me take part in the play, and gossip so much about me. Though he doesn't speak of it, it cuts him to the heart. Alas, I am to blame, and no one else." Countess Wildenau, obeying a sudden impulse, kissed the girl on the forehead. "Farewell, keep up courage, don't weep, rejoice in your new life, I will soon return." As she passed out, she spoke to the Gross sisters commending Josepha to their special care. "The gentlemen are delighted, and send you their most grateful homage," called the prince. "Then they are all coming," said Countess Wildenau, taking his arm. "All, there was no hesitation," he answered, again noticing in his companion's manner the restlessness which had formerly awakened his anxiety. As they passed down the street together, her eyes were wandering everywhere. "She is seeking someone," thought the prince. "Let me tell you that I am charmed with this Ammergau Christ," cried the Duchess, as they approached the blacksmith's house. She was sitting in the garden, which contained a tolerably large manure heap, a salitel, the name given to an open summer-house, and 3 fruit trees, amid which the clotheslines were stretched. On the house was a rudely painted Madonna, life-size, with the usual bunch of flowers, gazing with a peculiar expression at the homage offered to her son, or at least, so it seemed to the Countess. "Have you seen him, Duchess?" "I am beginning to be jealous," said the Countess with a laugh intended to be natural, but which sounded a little forced. The visitors entered the arbour, after an exchange of greeting. The Duchess told her guests that she had been with the ladies to the drawing school, where they had met Freya. The headmaster, the son of Countess von Wildenau's host, had presented him to the ladies, and he had been obliged to exchange a few words with them. Then he made his escape. They were fairly wild, his bearing, his dignity, the blended courtesy and reserve of his manner, so modest and yet so proud, and those eyes. The prince was on coals of fire. The blacksmith was hammering outside, shoeing a horse whose hoof was so crooked that the iron would not fit. The man's face was dripping with sooty perspiration, yet when he turned it toward the ladies, they saw a classic profile and soft, dreamy eyes. "Beautiful hair and eyes appear to be a specialty among the Ammergau peasants," said the prince somewhat abruptly, interrupting the duchess. "Look at yonder smith, wash off the soot, and we shall have a superb head of Antinous." "Yes, isn't that true? He is a splendid fellow too," replied the duchess. "Let us call him here." The smith was summoned and, wiping the grime from his face with his shirt sleeves, modestly approached. The prince watched with honest admiration the man's gait and bearing, clear-cut, intelligent features, and slender, lithe figure, which betrayed no sign of his hard labour save in the tense sinews and muscles of the arms. "I must apologize," he said in excellent German. "The Ammergau people use dialect only when speaking to one another. I am in my working clothes and scarcely fit to be seen." "You have a charming voice. Do you sing baritone?" "Yes, your highness, but I rarely sing at all. My voice, unfortunately, is much injured by my hard toil, and my fingers are growing too stiff to play on the piano, so I cannot accompany myself." "Do you play on the piano?" "Certainly, your highness." "Good heavens! Where did you learn?" "Here in the village, your highness, your highness." "Each one of us learns to use some instrument, else where should we obtain an orchestra for the Passion?" "Think of it," said the duchess in French, "a blacksmith who plays on the piano, peasants who form an orchestra." Then addressing her host in German, she added, "I suppose you have a church choir?" "Certainly, your highness. And what masses do you perform?" "Oh, nearly all the beautiful ones. Some dating from the ancient Sicilian church music, others from the later masters, Handel, Bach, down to the most modern times. A short time ago I sung Gounod's Ave Maria in the church, and this winter we shall give a Gethsemane by Kempter." "Is it possible?" said the duchess. "Said unique. Then you are really all artists and ought not to follow such hard trades." "Yes, duchess, but we must live. Our wives and children must be supported. All cannot be woodcarvers, smiths are needed too. If the artisan is not rough, the trade is no disgrace." "But have you time, with your business, for such artistic work?" "Oh yes, we do it in the evenings, after supper. We meet at 7:30 and often practice our music till 12 or even 1 o'clock. Oh, how tired you must be to study far into the night after the labour of the day." "Oh, that doesn't harm us. It is our recreation and pleasure. Art is the only thing which lifts men above their daily cares." "I would not wish to live if I did not possess it, and we all have the same feeling." The ladies exchanged glances. "But when do you sleep? You must be obliged to rise early in the morning." "Oh, we Ammergau people are excitable. We need little sleep. To bed at 1 and up at 5 gives us rest enough." "Well then, you must live well, or you could not bear it." "Yes, we live very well. We have meat every Sunday," said the smith with much satisfaction. "C'est touchant!" cried the duchess. "Meat once a week, and the rest of the time?" "Oh, we eat something made of flour. My wife is an excellent cook. She was the cook in Count P.'s household," he added with great pride, casting an affectionate glance at the plump little woman, holding a child in her arms, standing at the door of the house. He would gladly have presented this admirable wife to the strangers, but the ladies seemed less interested in her. "What do you eat in the evening?" "We have coffee at 6 o'clock, and drink a few glasses of beer when we meet at the tavern." "And do all the Ammergau people live so?" "All. No one wants anything different. Even your Christ?" "Oh, he fares worse than we. He is unmarried, and has no one to care for him." "What a life, dear Countess, what a life!" the duchess murmured in French. "But you have a piano in your house. If you are able to get such an instrument, you ought to afford better food," said Her Excellency. The blacksmith smiled. "If we had had better food, we should not have been able to buy the piano. We saved it from our stomachs." "That is the true Ammergau spirit," said the Countess earnestly. "They will starve to secure a piano. Every endeavour is toward the ideal and the intellectual, for which they are willing to make any personal sacrifice. I have never seen such people." "Nor have I." "It seems as if the Passion Play gave them all a special consecration," answered the duchess. Countess von Wildenau rose. Her thoughts were so far away that she was about to take leave without remembering her invitation. But Prince Emil said impressively, "Countess, Surely you are forgetting that you intended to invite the ladies." "Yes, yes," she interrupted. "It had almost escaped my mind." The smith modestly went back to his work, for the horse was growing restless, and the odour of burnt horn and hair soon pervaded the atmosphere. Meanwhile, the Countess delivered her invitation, which was accepted with great enthusiasm. A stately, athletic man in a blouse, carrying a chest on his shoulder, passed the ladies. The burden was terribly heavy, for even his powerful, well-knit frame staggered under it, and his handsome, kingly head was bowed almost to the earth. "Look, Countess, that is Thomas Rendner, the Roman procurator. We shall soon make the acquaintance of the whole company. We sit here in the summer-house like a spider in its web, not a fly can pass unseen." "Good heavens, that pilot!" exclaimed the Countess, watching him with sympathizing eyes. "Poor man, today panting under an oppressive burden, tomorrow robed in purple and crowned with a diadem, only to exchange them again on the third day for the porter's dusty blouse, and take the yoke upon himself once more. What a contrast! And yet he loses neither his balance nor his temper. Indeed, I think that we can learn as much here outside of the passion play as from the spectacle itself." "Yes, if we watch with your deep, thoughtful eyes, my dear Countess," said the Duchess, kissing the speaker's brow. "We will discuss this subject farther when we drive with you the day after tomorrow." The ladies parted. Madeleine von Wildenau, leaning on the prince's arm, walked silently through the crowd which now, on the eve of the play, thronged the narrow streets. The din and tumult were enough to deprive one of sight and hearing. Dazed by the confusion, she clung closely to her companion's arm. "Good heavens, is it possible that Christianity still possesses such a power of attraction?" she murmured involuntarily while struggling through the throng. The ground in the Ettel road trembled under the roll of carriage wheels. The last evening train had arrived, and a flood of people and vehicles poured into the village, already almost crushed beneath the tide of human beings. Horses, half driven to death, dragging at a gallop heavy landaus crowded with 6 or 8 persons. Lumbering wagons containing 20 or 30 travellers just as they had climbed in, sometimes half clinging to the steps or the boxes of the wheels, swayed to and fro, intoxicated, excited by the mad rush and the fear of being left behind. Raging and shrieking like a horde of unchained fiends come to disturb the sacred drama, rather than pious pilgrims who wish to witness it, the frantic mob poured in. "Sauve qui peut" was the motto. The prince lifted the Countess on a small post by the roadside. Just at that moment the fire brigade marched by to watch the theatre. It was said that several of the neighbouring parishes, envious of Ammergau, had threatened to ruin the play by setting the theatre on fire. Fire engines and strangers' carriages passed pell-mell. The people of Ammergau themselves, alarmed and enraged by the cruel threat, were completely disconcerted. Passionate discussions, vehement commands, and urgent entreaties were heard on all sides. Prompt and energetic action was requisite. The fate of all Ammergau was at stake. The bells now began to ring, and at the same moment the first of the 25 cannon shots, which were to consecrate the morrow's festival, was discharged, and the musicians passed through the streets. The air fairly quivered with the deafening uproar of all these mingling waves of sound. Darkness was gathering. The Countess grew giddy. She felt as if she were stifling in the tumult. A pair of horses fell just below them, causing a break in the line of carriages, which the prince used to get his companion across, and she at last reached home, almost fainting. Her soul was stirred to its inmost depths. What was the power which produced such effects? Was this the calm, petty doctrine, which had been inculcated so theoretically and coldly at the schoolroom desk and from the pulpit, and with which, when a child, she has been disgusted by an incomprehensible school catechism? Was this the doctrine which, from earliest childhood, had been nothing more than a wearisome dead letter, to which, as it had become the religion of the state, an official visit to church was due from time to time, just as, on certain days, cards were left on ambassadors and government officials? The wind still bore from the village the noise of the throngs of people, the ringing of the bells and the thunder of the cannon, blended with occasional bursts of music. The Countess had had similar experiences when tidings of great victories had been received during the last war, but those were facts. For the first time in her life she asked herself if Christianity was a fact. And if not, if it was only an idea, what inherent power, after the lapse of nearly 2,000 years, produced such an effect? Why did all these people come? Why did she herself? The human race is homesick. It no longer knows for what. It is only a vague impulse, but one which instinctively draws it in the direction where it perceives a sign, a vestige of what it has lost and forever seeks. Such, she knows it now. Such is the feeling of all the throngs that have flocked hither today. She realized that at this moment she was a microcosm of weary, wandering mankind seeking for salvation. And as when, deceived and disappointed in everything, we seek the picture of some dead friend, long since forgotten, and press it weeping to our lips, she clung to the image of the Redeemer. Now that everything had deluded her, no system which had boastfully promised a victory over calamity and death had stood the test. After one makeshift had supplanted another without supplying what was lacking. After all the vaunted remedies of philosophy and materialism proved mere palliatives which make the evil endurable for the moment, but do not heal it, suffering, cheated humanity was suddenly seeking the image of the lost friend so long forgotten. But a dead friend cannot come forth from a picture. A painted heart can no longer beat. Could Christ rise again in his image? Could his word live once more on the lips of a stranger? And would the drops of artificial blood, trickling from the brow of the personified Messiah, possess redeeming power? That was the miracle which attracted the throngs from far and near. That must be the marvel, and tomorrow it would be revealed. "Of what are you dreaming, Countess Madeleine?" asked the prince after a pause which she had spent in the wild grape arbour near the house, gazing into vacancy, with her head resting on her hand. She looked up, glancing at him as if she had entirely forgotten his presence. "I don't know what is the cause of my emotion. The tumult in the village has stirred me deeply. I feel that only potent things could send such a storm before them, and it seems as if it was the portent of some wonderful event. Good heavens, what extravagant fancies, my dear Countess! I believe you add to all your rich gifts the dangerous one of poesy. I admire and honour you for it, but I can perceive in this storm nothing save a proof that curiosity is the greatest and most universal trait in human character, and that these throngs desire nothing more than the satisfaction of their curiosity. The affair is fashionable just now, and that explains the whole." "Prince, I pity you for what you have just said," replied the Countess, rising. Her face wore the same cold, lifeless expression as on the day of her arrival. "But, my dearest friend, for heaven's sake tell me, did you and I come from any other motive than curiosity? You, no. I, yes. Don't say that, cher ami. You, the scholar, superior to us all in learning, you, the disciple of Schopenhauer, the proud philosopher, the believer in nirvana." "Yes, I, Prince," cried the Countess, "the philosopher who was not happy for an hour, not content for a moment. What is this nirvana? A stone idol, which the fruitless speculation of our times has conjured from the rubbish of archaeological excavations, and which stares at us with its vacant eyes until we fall into an intellectual hypnotism which we mistake for peace." An expression of bitter sarcasm rested on her lips. "I came here to bring pessimism and Christianity face to face. I thought it would be very novel to see the stone idol Nirvana, with his hands on his lap and the silence of eternal death on his lips, watch the martyr, dripping with sweat and blood, bear his own cross to the place of execution and cheerfully take up the work where Buddha faltered, on the boundary of non-existence. I wanted to see how the two would treat each other, if for nothing more than a comparative study of religion." "You are irresistible in your charming mockery, dearest Countess, yet logically I cannot confess myself conquered," replied the prince. The Countess smiled. "Of course, when did a man ever acknowledge that to a woman, where intellectual matters were concerned? A sunny curl, the seductive arch of an upper lip, a pair of blue eyes sparkling with tears will make you lords of creation, the dupes of the most ordinary coquette, or even the yielding toy of the dullest ignorance. We women all know it. But, if we assail your dry logic, you are as unconquerable as Antaeus so long as he stood upon the earth. You, too, could only be vanquished by whoever had the power to lift you from the ground where you stand. You might have that power, Countess, not by your arguments, but by your eyes. You know that one loving glance would not only lift me from the earth but into heaven, and then you could do with me what you would. You have forfeited the loving glance. Perhaps it might have rewarded your assent, but it would never purchase it. I scorn bribed judges, for I am sure of my cause. Countess, pardon my frankness, it is a pity that you have so much intellect. Why? Because it leads you into sophistical byways. Your tendency to mysticism gives an apparently logical foundation, and thereby strengthens you the more in this dangerous course. A more simple, temperate judgment would guard you from it. Well, Prince, she looked at him pityingly, contemptuously. May heaven preserve me from such a judgment as well as from all who may seek to supply its place to me. Excuse me for this evening. I should like to devote an hour to these worthy people and soothe my nerves. I have been too much excited by the scenes we have witnessed. Good night, Prince. Prince Emil turned pale. Good night, Countess. Perhaps tomorrow you will be somewhat more humane in this cat and mouse game. Today I am sent home with a bleeding wound. With lips firmly compressed, he bowed his farewell and left the garden. Madeleine looked after him. He's angry. I cannot help him, he deserved it. Oh, foolish man who deemed yourself so clever. Do you suppose this glowing heart desires no other revelations than those of pure reason? Do you imagine that the arguments of all the philosophical systems of humanity could offer it that for which it longs? Shall I find it? Heaven knows. But one thing is certain, I shall no longer seek it in you. The sound of moans and low sobs came from the chamber above the Countess' room. It was Josepha. Countess Wildenau passed through the little trap door and entered it. The girl was kneeling beside the bed, with her face buried in the pillows, to shut out the thunder of the cannon and the sound of the bells, which summoned the actors in the sacred play from which she alone, the sinner, the outcast, was shut out. Mary Magdalene, too, had sinned and erred, yet she had been suffered to remain near the Lord. She was permitted to touch his divine body and to wipe his feet with her hair. But she was not allowed to render this service to his image. She grasped the mass of wonderful silken locks which fell in loosened masses over her shoulders. What did she care for this beautiful hair now? She would fain cut it off and throw it into the Ammer, or, better still, bury it in the earth on which the Passion Theatre stood. With a hasty movement, she snatched a pair of shears which lay beside the bed, and just as the Countess' foot touched the threshold, a sharp, cutting sound was heard, and the most beautiful red hair that ever adorned a girl's head fell like a dying flame at her feet. "Josepha, what are you doing?" cried the Countess. "Oh, what a pity to lose that magnificent hair! What do I care for it?" sobbed Josepha. "It can never be seen in the play. When the performance is over, I will slip into the theatre before we leave and bury it under the stage, where the cross stands. There I will leave it. There it shall stay, since I am no longer able to make it serve him." She threw herself into the Countess's arms and hid her tear-stained face upon her bosom. Alas, she was not even allowed to appear among the populace. She alone was banished from the cross, yet she knew that the real Saviour would have suffered her to be at his feet, as well as Mary Magdalene. Console yourself, Josepha, your belief does not deceive you. The real Christ would not have punished you so cruelly. Men are always more severe than God. Whence should they obtain divine magnanimity? They are so petty. They are like a servant who is arrogant and avaricious for his master, because he does not understand his wishes and turns from the door, the poor whom his master would gladly have welcomed and refreshed. She kissed the young girl's brow. Be calm, Josepha. Gather up your hair. You shall bury it tomorrow in the earth which is so dear to you. I promise that I will think of you when the other Magdalene appears. Your shadow shall stand between her and me, so that I shall see you alone. Will this be a slight consolation to you?" Josepha, for the first time, looked up into the Countess' eyes with a smile. "Yes, it is a comfort." "Ah, you are so kind. You take pity on me while all reproach and condemn me. Oh, Josepha, if people judged thus, which of us would be warranted in casting the first stone at you?" The Countess uttered the words with deep earnestness and thoughtfully left the room. Chapter 7. Passion, Play. Day was dawning. The first rays of the morning sun, ever broader and brighter, were darting through the air, whose blue waves surged and quivered under the flaming quasars of the ascending god of day. Aphrodite seemed to have bailed and left her veil in the foam of the wild mountain stream into which the penitent Magdalene had tried to throw herself. Apollo, in graceful sport, had gathered the little white clouds to conceal the goddess, and they waved and fluttered merrily in the morning breeze around the rushing chariot. Then, as if the thundering hoof-beats of the fiery chargers had echoed from the vaulted arch of the firmament, the solemn roar of cannon announced the approach of the other god, the poor, unassuming, scourged divinity in his beggar garb. The radiant charioteer above curbed his impatient steeds and gazed down from his serene height upon the conflict, the torturing, silent conflict of suffering upon the bloody battlefield of the timorous earth. Smiling, he shook his divine head, for he could not understand the cause of all this. Why should a god impose upon himself such misery and humiliation? But he knows that he was a more powerful god, for he was forced to fly from the zenith when the former rose from his grave. So thought Helios, glancing over at the gentle goddess Selene, whose wan face, paling in his presence, was turned full toward the earth. She could not bear to behold the harrowing spectacle. She was the divinity of peace and slumber, so, averting her mild countenance, she bade Helios farewell and floated away to happier realms. Blessed gods, ye who sit throned in eternal beauty, eternal peace, ye who are untouched by the grief and suffering of the human race, who descend to earth merely to taste the joys of mortals when it pleases ye to add them to your divine delights, look down upon the gods whom sorrowing humanity, laden with the primeval curse, summoned from his heaven to aid, where none of ye aided, to give what none of ye gave, the heart's blood of love. Gaze from your selfish pleasures, ye gay Hellenic deities, behold from your Valhalla, grim divinities of the Norsemen. Look hither, ye dull, stupid idols of ancient India, hither where, from love for the human race, a god bleeds upon the martyr's cross. Behold and turn pale, for when the monstrous deed is done, and the night has passed, he will cast aside his humble garb and shine in his divine glory. Ye will then be nothing but the rainbow which shimmers in changeful hues above his head. Excelsior, echoes a voice through the pure morning sky, and Gloria in excelsis Deo peals from the church as the priests chant the early mass. An hour later, the prince stopped before the door in a carriage to convey the countess to the Passion Theatre, for the way was long and rough. He gave the Gross sisters strict orders to have everything ready for Countess Wildenau's departure at the close of the performance. The carriages must stand packed with the luggage before the theatre when we come out. The new maid must not be late. Madeleine von Wildenau made no objection to all this. She was very pale and deeply agitated. Ludwig Gross, who was also just going to the theatre, was obliged to enter the carriage too. The countess would listen to no refusal. The prince looked coldly at him. Ludwig Gross raised his hat, saying courteously, "May I request an introduction?" The lady blushed. "Herr Gross, headmaster of the drawing school." She paused a moment in embarrassment. Ludwig's bronze countenance still retained its expectant expression. "The hereditary Prince of Metten-Barnheim," said the prince, relieving the countess' embarrassment and raising his hat. The drawing master's delicate tact instantly perceived Prince Emil's generous intention. "Pardon me," he said, with a shade of bashfulness. "I did not know that I was in the presence of a gentleman of such high rank." "No, no, you were perfectly right," interrupted Prince Emil, who was pleased with the man's modest confidence and immediately entered into conversation with him. He asked various questions, and Ludwig described how he was frequently compelled to get suitable figures for his tableau from the forests and the fields, because the better educated people all had parts assigned to them, and how difficult it was to work with this untrained material, especially as he had barely 2 or 3 minutes to arrange a tableau containing 300 persons. The countess gazed absently at the motley throngs surging toward the Passion Theatre. The fresh morning breeze blew into the carriage. All nature was full of gladness, a festal joy which even the countess' richly caparisoned horses seemed to share, for they pranced gaily and dashed swiftly on as if they would fain vie with the sun, God's steeds above. The Bavarian flags on the Passion Theatre fluttered merrily against the blue sky, and now another discharge of cannon announced the commencement of the performance. The carriage made its way with much difficulty through the multitude to the entrance, which was surrounded by natives of Ammergau. Ludwig Gross ordered the driver to stop and sprang out. All respectfully made way for him, raising their hats. "Ah, Herr Gross, the drawing master, good day." "Good day," replied Ludwig Gross, then unceremoniously giving the countess his arm, requested the prince to follow and led them through several side passages, to which strangers were not admitted, into the space reserved for boxes, where 2 fine-looking young men, also members of the Gross family, the ushers, were taking tickets. Ludwig lifted his hat and left them to go to his work. The prince shook hands with him and expressed his thanks. "A cultured man," he said after Ludwig had gone. Meanwhile, one of the ushers had conducted the countess to her seat. There directly before her lay the long-desired goal, a huge amphitheatre built in the Greek style. Between the boxes, which overlooked the whole, and the stage, under the open sky, extended a vast space, whose seats rose to the height of a house. The orchestra, too, was roofless, as also were the proscenium and the stage, at whose extreme right and left stood the houses of Pilate and Caiaphas, between which stretched the streets of Jerusalem. The chorus was stationed on the proscenium, and here all the great scenes in which the populace took part were performed. The main stage, occupying the centre only, as in the Greek theatre, was a temple-like covered building with a curtain, in a certain sense, a theatre within a theatre, where the scenes that required a smaller frame were set. Beyond, the whole was surrounded by the amphitheatre of the lofty mountains gazing down in majestic repose, surmounting and crowning all. The orchestra was playing the last bars of the overture, and the surging and hum of the thousands who were finding their seats had at last ceased. The chorus came forward, all the singers clad in the Greek costume, at their head as Choragus Johannes Dima, arrayed in diadem and toga. A majestic figure of true priestly dignity, he moved across the stage, fully imbued with the spirit of the sublime drama which it was his honourable office to open. Deep silence now reigned throughout the audience. It seemed as if nature herself was listening outside. The whispering morning breeze held its breath, and not a single bird note was heard. The repose of the Sabbath spread its wings protectingly over the whole scene, that nothing should disturb this consecrated mood. As the stately figures advanced wearing their costly robes with as much dignity as if they had never been clad in any other garments, or would be forced again to exchange them for the coarse torn blouse of toil, as they began to display the art acquired with such self-sacrificing devotion after a wearisome day of labour, and the choragus in the purest, noblest intonation began the first lines, "Sink prostrate, overwhelmed with sacred awe. O human race, bowed by the curse of God." The Countess's heart was suddenly stirred by a new emotion, and tears filled her eyes. "Eternal God, thy stammering children hear, for children's language, I is stammering." In these words the devout lips expressed the sacred meaning underlying the childish pastime, and those who heard it feel themselves once more children, children of the one omnipresent Father. And the prologue was over. The curtain of the central stage rolled up, and the first tableau, the expulsion of Adam and Eve from paradise, was revealed. Countess Madeleine gazed at it with kindly eyes, for Ludwig Gross' refined artistic instinct was visible to her. His firm hand had shaped the rude material into these graceful lines. A second tableau followed, the Adoration of the Cross. An empty cross, steeped in light, stood on a height worshipped by groups of children and angels. The keynote was thus given, and the drama began. The first scene was before the temple at Jerusalem. The Saviour's entry was expected. Madeleine von Wildenau's heart throbbed heavily. She did not herself know the cause of her emotion. It almost robbed her of breath. Will it be he whom she expects, to whom she is bound by some incomprehensible, mysterious spell? Will she find him? Shouts of "Hosanna" echoed from the distance. An increasing tumult was audible. A crowd of people, rejoicing and singing praises, poured out of the streets of Jerusalem. The first heralds of the procession appeared, breathlessly announcing his approach. An indescribable fear overpowered the Countess. But it now seemed to her as if she did not dread the man whom she expected to see, but him he was to personate. The audience, too, became restless. A vibrating movement ran like a faint whisper through the multitude. He is coming. The procession now poured upon the stage, a surging mass. Passionately excited people waving palms, and in their midst, mounted on a miserable beast of burden, the master of the world. The Countess scarcely dared to look. She feared the dismounting, which might shock her aesthetic sense. But lightly as a thought, with scarcely a movement, he had already slipped from the animal. Not one of the thousands saw how. "It is he!" Madeleine's brain whirled. An unspeakable joy overwhelmed her. "When shall I behold thee face to face?" Her own words, spoken the evening before, rang in her ears, and the realization was standing before her. The Christ! A thrill of reverence stirred the throng. Aye, it was he, from head to foot! He had not uttered a word, yet all hearts sank conquered at his feet. Aye, that was the glance, the dignity, the calmness of a god. That was the soul which embraced and cherished a world. That was the heart of love which sacrificed itself for man, died upon the cross. Now the lips parted, and, like an airy winged genius, the words soared upward, a voice like an angel's shouting through the universe. Peace, peace on earth, now clear and resonant as Easter bells, now gentle and tender as a mother's soothing song beside the bed of her sick child. Source of love, thou art he. Mute, motionless, as if transfigured, the Countess gazed at the miracle, and with her thousands in the same mood. But from her, a secret bond stretched to him. From her alone among the thousands, a prophetic, divine bond, woven by their yearning souls on that night after she had beheld the face from which the gods so fervently implored, now smiled consent. The drama pursued its course. Christ looked around and perceived the traders with their wares, and the tables of the money, changers in the court of the temple. As cloud after cloud gradually rises in the blue sky and conceals the sun, noble indignation darkened the mild countenance, and the eyes flashed with a light which reminded Helios, watching above, of the darts of Zeus. My house, saith the Lord, shall be called a house of prayer, but ye have made it a den of thieves. And as though his wrath was a power which emanating from him acted without any movement of his, a hurricane seemed to sweep over the stands of the traders, while not a single vehement motion destroyed the calmness of the majestic figure. The tables were overthrown, the money rolled on the ground, the cages of the doves burst open, and the frightened birds soared with arrowy speed over the heads of the spectators. The traders raged and shrieked, my doves, my money!" and rushed to save the silver coins and scattered wares. But he stood motionless amid the tumult, like the stone of which he said, Whosoever shall fall upon that stone shall be broken, but on whomsoever it shall fall, it will grind him to powder. Then, with royal dignity, he swung the scourge over the backs bowed to seize their paltry gains. Take these things hence, make not my father's house a house of merchandise. He did not strike, yet it seemed as though the scourge had fallen, for the dealers fled in wild confusion before the uplifted hand, and terror seized the Pharisees. They perceived that he who stood before them was strong enough to crush them all. His breath had the might of the storm, his glance was consuming flame, his lash felled without striking. He need only will, and, in 3 days, he would build a new temple as he boasted. Roaring like the sea in a tempest, the exulting populace surrounded him, yielding to his sway as the waves recede before the breath of the mighty ruler. Aye, this was the potent spirit of the Jehovah of the Jews, the Zeus of the Greeks, the Jupiter of the Romans. This man was the son of the God who created heaven and earth, and it would be an easy matter for the heir of this power to crush the Pharisees without stirring a finger, if he desired. But that was the point, it was not his will, for his mission was a different one. The head once more drooped humbly, the brow, corrugated with anger, smoothed. I have done my father's bidding. I have saved the honor of his house. The storm died away into a whisper, and the mild gaze rested forgivingly upon his foes. The Countess's virile heart almost rebelled against this humility, and would fain have cried out, Thou art the Son of God, help thyself. Her sense of justice, formed according to human ideas, was opposed to this toleration, this sacrifice of the most sacred rights. Like Helios in the vault above, she could not understand the grandeur, the divinity of self-humiliation, of suffering truth and purity to be judged by falsehood and hypocrisy, instead of using his own power to destroy them. As if the personator of Christ suspected her thoughts, he suddenly fixed his glance, above the thousands of heads, directly upon her, and like a divine message, the words fell from his lips, but in many hearts, day will soon dawn. Then, turning with indescribable gentleness to his disciples, he added, Come, let us go into the temple, and there worship the Father. He walked toward it, yet it did not seem as if his feet moved. He vanished from the spectators' eyes noiselessly, gradually, like the fleeting of a happy moment. The Countess covered her eyes with her hand. She felt as if she were dreaming a sadly beautiful dream. The Prince watched her silently, but intently. Nods and gestures of greeting came from the boxes on all sides, from the Duchess, the diplomatic corps, and numerous acquaintances who happened to be there. But the Countess saw nothing. The drama went on. It was the old story of the warfare of baseness against nobility, falsehood against truth. The Pharisees availed themselves of the injury to the tradesmen's interests to make them their allies. The populace, easily deluded, was incited against the agitator from Galilee, who wished to rob them of the faith of their fathers and drive the dealers from the temple. So the conspiracy arose and swelled to an avalanche to crush the sacred head. Christ had dealt a rude blow to all that was base in human nature, but baseness was the greater power, to which even God must succumb while he remained a dweller upon earth. But, even in yielding, he conquered. Death bestowed the palm of victory. Between the first and second act was a tableau, Joseph sold by his brethren. With thoughtful discrimination, every important incident in the play was suggested by a corresponding event in the Old Testament, represented by a tableau, in order to show the close connection between the Old and the New Testament, and verify the words that all things which are written may be fulfilled. At last the curtain rose again, and revealed the Sanhedrim assembled for judgment. Here sat the leaders of the people of Israel, and also of Oberammergau. In the midst was Caiaphas, the high priest, the chief of the Sanhedrim, the burgomaster of Ammergau, and chief manager of the Passion Play. At his right and left sat the oldest members of the community of Ammergau, an old man with a remarkably fine face and long white beard, as Annas, and the sacristan, an impressive figure as Nathanael. On both sides, in a wide circle, were the principal men in the parish, robed as priests and Pharisees. What heads, what figures! The burgomaster, Caiaphas, rose and, with a brief address, opened the discussion. Poor Son of God, how wilt thou fare in the presence of this mighty one of earth? The burgomaster was the type of the fanatical, ambitious priest, not a blind, dull zealot. Nay, he was the representative of the aristocratic hierarchy, the distinguished men of the highest intelligence and culture. A face rigid, as though chiselled from stone, yet animated by an intellect of diabolical superiority, which would never confess itself conquered, which no terror could intimidate, no marvel dazzle, no suffering move. Tall and handsome in the very flower of manhood, with eyes whose glances pierced like javelins, a tiara on his haughty head, robed in all the pomp of oriental priestly dignity, every clanking ornament a symbol of his arrogant iron nature, every motion of his delicate white hands, every fold of his artistically draped mantle, every hair of his flowing beard a proof of that perfect conscious mastery of outward ceremonial peculiar to those who are accustomed to play a shrewdly planned part before the public. Thus he stood, terrible yet fascinating, repellent yet attractive, nay, to the trained eye of an artist who could appreciate this masterly blending of the most contradictory influences, positively enthralling. This was the effect produced upon Countess Wildenau. The feeling of indignation roused by the incomprehensible humiliation of the divine martyr almost tempted her to side with the resolute foe who manfully defended his own honour with his gods. A noble-hearted woman cannot withstand the influence of genuine intellectual manfulness, and until the martyrdom of Christ became heroism, the firm, unyielding high priest exerted an irresistible charm over the countess. The conscious mastery, the genius of the performer, the perfection of his acting, roused and riveted the artistic interest of the cultivated woman, and as, with the people of Ammergau, the individual and the actor are not two distinct personages, as among professional artists, she knew that the man before her also possessed a lofty nature, and the nimbus of Ammergau constantly increased. The spirit ruling the whole obtained still greater sway. The sacristan was also an imposing figure as Nathanael, the second high priest, who, with all the power of pharisaical superiority and sophistry, appeared as Christ's accuser. The eloquence of these two judges was overpowered, and into the surging waves of passion, Annas, in his venerable dignity, dropped with steady hand the sharp anchor of cold, pitiless resolve. An imposing, sinister assembly was this great Sanhedrim, and every spectator involuntarily felt the dread always inspired by a circle of stern, cruel despots. Poor lamb, what will be thy fate? Destiny pursued its course. In the next act, Christ announced his approaching death to the disciples. Now it seemed as though he bore upon his brow an invisible helm of victory, on which the dove of the Holy Spirit rested with outspread wings. Now he was the hero who chose death. Yet meekness was diffused throughout his whole bearing, was the impress of his being, the meekness which spares others but does not tremble for itself. A new perception dawned upon the Countess. To be strong yet gentle was the highest nobility of the soul. And as here also the character and its personator were one, she knew that the men before her possessed these attributes, strength and gentleness. Now her defiant spirit at last melted, and she longed to take him to her heart to atone for the injustice of the human race. She thanked Simon for receiving the condemned man under his hospitable roof. I love him. I too love him. She longed to cry out to those who were ministering to him. But when Mary Magdalene touched and anointed him, she averted her eyes, for she grudged her the privilege and thought of her poor beautiful penitent at home. As he uttered the words, "Rise, Magdalene. Darkness is gathering, and the wintry storms are raging. Yet be comforted. In the early morning, in the spring garden, thou wilt see me again." Tears streamed from her eyes. "When will the morning dawn that I shall greet thee in the spring garden, redeeming love?" asked a voice in her heart. But when Mary appeared and Christ took leave of his mother, when the latter sank upon the breast of her divine Son, and he consoled her with a voice whose sweetness no ear had ever heard equalled, a feeling which she had never experienced took possession of her. It was neither envy nor jealousy, only a sorrowful longing, if I were only in her place. And when Christ said, "My hour is come, now is my soul troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour, but for this cause came I unto this hour." And Mary, remembering Simeon's words, cried, "Simeon, thy prediction, a sword shall pierce through thy own soul also, is now fulfilled." The Countess, for the first time, understood the meaning of the pictures of Mary with the 7 swords in her heart. Her own was bleeding from the keenness of her anguish. Now, overpowered with emotion, he again extended his arms. "Mother, mother, receive thy son's fervent gratitude for all the love and faith which thou hast bestowed in the 33 years of my life. Farewell, dear mother." The Countess felt as if she would no longer endure it, that she must sink in a sea of grief and yearning. "My son, where shall I see thee again?" asked Mary. "Yonder, dear mother, where the words of the Scripture shall be fulfilled. He is brought as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shearers is dumb, so he openeth not his mouth." While the others were weeping over the impending calamity, Christ said, "Be not overcome in the first struggle. Trust in me." And as he spoke, the loving soul knew that it might rest on him and be secure. He moved away. Serene, noble, yet humble, he went to meet his death. The curtain fell, but this time there was no exchange of greetings from the boxes. The faces of their occupants were covered to conceal the tears of which they were ashamed, yet could not restrain. The Countess and her companion remained silent. Madeleine's forehead rested on her hand. The Prince was secretly wiping his eyes. "People of God, lo, thy Saviour is near. The Redeemer, long promised, hath come," sang the chorus, and the curtain rising showed Christ and his disciples on the way to Jerusalem. It was the moment that Christ wept over Jerusalem. Tears of the keenest anguish which can pierce the heart of a God, tears for the sins of the world. "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, if thou hadst known, even thou, at least in this thy day, the things which belongs unto thy peace. But now they are hid from thine eyes." The disciples entreated their master not to enter the hostile city and thus avoid the crime which it was destined to commit, or to enter and show himself in his power, to judge and to reward. "Children, what ye desire will be done in its time, but my ways are ordered by my Father, and thus saith the Lord, my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways." And loyal and obedient, he followed the path of death. Judas alone lingered behind, resolving to leave the fallen greatness which promised no earthly profit and would bring danger and disgrace upon its adherents. In this mood he was met by Dathan, Andreas Gross, who was seeking a tool for the vengeance of the money changers. Finding it in Judas, he took him before the Sanhedrim. An impressive and touching tableau now introduced a new period, the gathering of manna in the wilderness, which refreshed the starving children of Israel. A second followed, the colossal bunch of grapes from Canaan. The Lord miraculously fed the multitude in the desert with the manna and rejoiced their hearts with the grapes of Canaan. But Jesus offers us a richer banquet from heaven. "From the mystery of his body and blood flows mercy and salvation," sang the chorus. The curtain rose again. Christ was at supper with his disciples. He addressed them in words of calm farewell. But they did not yet fully understand, for they asked who would be first in his heavenly kingdom. His only answer was to lay aside his upper garment, gird, with divine dignity, a cloth about his loins, and kneel to perform for the disciples the humblest service, the washing of their feet. The human race looked on in breathless wonder. Viewless bands of angels soared downward, and the demons of pride and defiance in human nature fled and hid themselves in the inmost recesses of their troubled hearts. I, the strong soul of the woman, which had at first rebelled against the patience of the suffering God, now understood it, and to her also light came. As he had promised, and, by the omnipotent feeling which urged her to the feet of him who knelt rendering the lowliest service to the least of his disciples, she perceived the divinity of humility. It was over. He had risen and put on his upper garment. He stood with his figure drawn up to his full height and gazed around the circle. "Now ye are clean, but not all." and his glance rested mournfully on Peter, who before the cock crew would deny him thrice, and on Judas, who would betray him for 30 pieces of silver. Then he again took his seat, and, as the presentiment of approaching death transfigures even the most commonplace mortal, and illumines the struggling soul at the moment of its separation from the body, so the God transfigured the earthly form of the Son of Man, and appeared more and more plainly on the pallid face, ere he left the frail husk which he had chosen for his transitory habitation. And as the dying man distributes his property among his heirs, he bequeathed his. But he had nothing to give, save himself. As the cloud dissolves into millions of raindrops which the thirsting earth drinks, he divided himself into millions of atoms which, in the course of the ages, were to refresh millions of human beings with the banquet of love. His body and his blood were his legacy. He divided it into countless portions, to distribute it among countless heirs, yet it remained one, and the part is to every one the whole. For as an element remains a great unity, no matter into how many atoms it may dissolve, as water is always water whether in single drops or in the ocean, fire always fire in sparks or a conflagration, so Christ is always Christ in the drops of the chalice and the particles of the bread, as well as in his original person, for he too is an element, the element of divinity. As kindred kneel around the bedside of a loved one who is dying, bedew his hand with tears, and utter the last entreaty, "Forgive us if we have ever wounded you." The thousands of spectators longed to kneel, and there was not one who did not yearn to press his lips to the wonderful hand which was distributing the bread, and cry, "Forgive us our sins." But as reverence for the dying restrains loud lamentations, the spectators controlled themselves in order not to sob aloud, and thus disturb the divine peace throned upon the conqueror's brow. Destiny now relentlessly pursued its course. Judas sold his master for 30 pieces of silver, and they were paid to him before the Sanhedrim. The pieces of silver rang on the stone table upon which they were counted out. It seemed as if the clear sound was sharply piercing the world, like the edge of a scythe destined to mow down the holiest things. The priests exulted. There was joy in the camp of the foes. All that human arrogance and self-conceit could accomplish raised its head triumphantly in Caiaphas. The regal priest stood so firmly upon the height of his secular power that nothing could overthrow him, and Jesus of Nazareth must die. So the evening came when Christ went with the 12 disciples to the Mount of Olives to await his doom. "Father, the hour is come, glorify thy Son, that thy Son may also glorify thee. I have finished the work which thou gavest me to do. I have manifested thy name unto men. Father, sanctify them through thy truth, that they all may be one, as thou, Father, art in me and I in thee." He climbed the lonely mount in the garden of olive trees to pass through the last agony, the agony of death, which seized upon even the Son of God so long as he was still bound by the laws of the human body. "Father, if thou be willing, let this cup pass from me." Here Freya's acting reached its height. It was no longer semblance, but reality. The sweat fell in burning drops from his brow, and tears streamed from his eyes. "Yet not my will, but thine be done, thy sacred will," clasping his trembling hands, he flung himself prone on the ground, hiding his tear-stained face. "Father, thy Son, hear him!" The throng breathed more and more heavily. The tears flowed faster. The heart of all humanity was touched with the anguished cry, "O sins of humanity, ye crush me! O the terrible burden, the bitter cup!" With this anguish the Son of God first drew near to the human race. In this suffering he first bent down to mortals that they might embrace him lovingly like a mortal brother. And it was so at this moment also. They would fain have dragged him from the threatening cross, defended him with their own bodies, purchased his release at any cost. Too late, this repentance should have come several centuries earlier. The hour of temptation was over. The disciples had slept and left him alone. But the angel of the Lord had comforted him, the angel whom God sends to every one who is deserted by men. He was himself again, the conqueror of the world. Judas came with the officers and pressed upon the sweet mouth on which the world would fain hang in blissful self-forgetfulness, the traitor's kiss. "Judas, can you touch those lips and not fall at the feet of him you have betrayed?" cried a voice in Madeleine von Wildenau's heart. "Can you kiss the lips which so patiently endure the death-dealing caress, and not find your hate transformed to love?" Ah, only the divine can recognize the divine, only sympathetic natures attract one another. Judas is the symbol of the godless world, which would no longer perceive God's presence, even if he came on earth once more. The soldiers, brawny fellows, fell to the ground as he stood before them with the words, "I am Jesus of Nazareth." And he was forced to say, "Rise, fear ye not," that they might accomplish their work. But Judas remained unmoved and delivered him up. Christ was a prisoner and descended step by step into the deepest ignominy. But no matter through what mire of baseness and brutality they dragged him, hailing him from trial to trial, nothing robbed him of the majesty of the Redeemer. And if his speech had been full of power, so was his silence. Before the Sanhedrin, before Herod, and finally before Pilate, he was the king, and the mighty ones of earth were insignificant in his presence. "Who knows whether this man is not the son of some god?" murmured the polytheistic Romans, and shrank from the mystery which surrounded the silent one. The impression here was produced solely by Freya's imposing calmness and unearthly eyes. The glance he cast at Herod when the latter ordered him to perform a miracle, darken the judgment chamber or transform a roll of papyrus into a serpent. That one glance, full of dignity and gentleness, fixed upon the poor, short-sighted child of the dust, was a greater miracle than all the conjuring tricks of the Egyptian magicians. But this very silence, this superiority, filled the priest with furious rage and hastened his doom, which he disdained to stay by a single word. True, Pilate strove to save him. The humane Roman, with his aristocratic bearing, as Thomas Rentner personated him with masterly skill, formed a striking contrast to the gloomy, fanatical priests. But he was not the man for violent measures, and the furious leaders understood how to present this alternative. The desire to conciliate, the refuge of all weak souls which shrink in terror from catastrophes, had already wrested from him a shameful concession. He had suffered the innocent one to be delivered to the scourge. With clenched teeth the spectators beheld the chaste form, bound to the stake and stained with blood, quiver beneath the lashes of the executioner, without a murmur of complaint from the silent lips. And when he had enough, as they phrased it, they placed him on a chair, threw a royal mantle about him, and placed a sceptre of reeds in the hand of the mock king. But he remained mute. The tormentors grew more and more enraged. They wanted to have satisfaction, to gloat over the moans of the victim. They dealt him a blow in the face, then a second one. Christ did not move. They thrust him from the chair so that he fell on the ground. No one ever forgot the beautiful, pathetic figure. But he was still silent. Then one of the executioners brought a crown made of huge thorns. He was raised again, and the martyr's diadem was placed upon his brow. The sharp thorns resisted. They would not fit the noble head. So his tormentors took 2 sticks laid crossways, and with them forced the spiked coronal so low on his forehead that drops of blood flowed. Christ quivered under the keen agony. But he was silent. Then he was dragged out of his blood, a spectacle to the populace. Again Helios above gave the rein to his radiant coursers. He thought of all the horrors in the history of his divine house, of the Danaides, of the chained Prometheus, and of others also. But he could recall nothing comparable to this, and loathed the human race. Averting his face, he guided his weary steeds slowly downward from the zenith. The evening breeze blew chill upon the scene of agony. A furious tumult filled the streets of Jerusalem. The priests were leading the raging mob to the governor's house, fanning their wrath to flame with word and gesture. Caiaphas, Nathanael, the fanatics of Judaism, Annas and Ezekiel, each at the head of a mob, rushed from 3 streets in an overwhelming concourse. The populace surged like the angry sea, and unchaining yet dominating the elements with word and glance, the lofty figure of Caiaphas, the high priest, towered in their midst. "Shake it off! Cast from you the yoke of the tempter. He has scorned Moses and the prophets. He has blasphemed God, to the cross with the false Messiah. May a curse rest on every one who does not vote for his death. Let him be cut off from the hereditary rights of our fathers." Thus the 4 leaders cast their watchword like firebrands among the throngs, and the blaze spread tumultuously. "The Nazarene must die, we demand judgment," roared the people. New bands constantly flocked in. "O fairest day of Israel, children, be resolute," threatened the general insurrection. The governor wished to hear the voice of the people. "Let him hear it," shrieked Caiaphas, and his passion stirred the mob to fiercer fury. All pressed forward to the house of Pilate. And the doors opened, and the governor came out. The handsome, classic countenance of the Roman expressed deep contempt as he surveyed the frantic mob. Behind him appeared the embodiment of sorrow, the picture of all pictures, the exe homo, which all the artists of the world have striven to represent, yet never exhausted the subject. Here it stood personified, before the eyes of men, and even the governor's voice trembled as he pointed to it. "Behold, what a man! Crucify him," was the answer. Pilate endeavored to give the fury of the mob another victim. The criminal Barabbas was brought forth and confronted with Christ, the basest of human beings and the noblest. But the spectacle did not move them, for the patience and serenity of the martyr expressed a grandeur which shamed them all, and this was the intolerable offence. The sight of the scourged, bleeding body did not cool their vengeance, because they saw that the spirit was unbroken. It must be quelled, that it might not rise in judgment against them, for they had gone too far. The ill-treated victim was a reproach to them. He could not be suffered to live longer. Release Barabbas. To death with the Nazarene, crucify him. Vainly the governor strove to persuade the people. The cool, circumspect man was too weak to defy these powers of hatred. He would fain save Christ, yet was unwilling to drive the fanatics to extremes. So he yielded, but the grief with which he did so, to avert a greater misfortune, absolved him from the terrible guilt whose curse he cast upon the leader's head. The expression with which he pronounced the sentence, uttered the words, "Then take ye him, and crucify him," voices the grief of the man of culture for eternal beauty. The bloodthirsty mob burst into a yell of exultation when their victim was delivered to them. Now they could cool their vengeance on him. To Golgotha, hence with him to the place of skulls. Christ, and thy sacrifices for these. Alas, the day will come, though perchance not for thousands of years, when thou wilt perceive that they were not worthy of it. But that will be the day of judgment. A crowd surged through the streets of Jerusalem, in their midst the condemned man, burdened with the instrument of his own martyrdom. In one corner amid the populace stood Mary, surrounded by a group of friends, and the mother beheld her son urged forward like a beast which, when it falls, is forced up with lashes and pressed on till it sinks lifeless. High above in the vaulted heavens, veiled by the gathering dew of evening, the gods whispered to one another with secret horror as they watched the unprecedented sight. Often as they might behold it, they could never believe it. The procession stopped before a house. Christ sank to the earth. A man came out and thrust him from the threshold. Hence there is no place here for you to rest. Ahasuerus. The tortured sufferer looked at him with the gaze of a dying deer, a single mute glance of agony. But the man on whom it fell never more found peace on earth, but was driven from every resting place, from land to land, from one spot to another, hunted on ceaselessly through the centuries, wandering forever. "He will die on the road," cried the first executioner. Christ had dragged himself a few steps forward and fell for the second time. "Drive him on with blows," shrieked the Pharisees and the people. "Oh, where is the sorrow like unto my sorrow?" moaned Mary, covering her face. "He is too weak, someone must help him," said the executioner. He could not be permitted to die there. The people must see him on the pillory. His face was covered with sweat and blood. Tears flowed from his eyes, but the mute lips uttered no word of complaint. Then his friends ventured to go and render whatever aid was permitted. Veronica offered him her handkerchief to wipe his face, and when he returned it, it bore in lines of sweat and blood, the portrait which throughout the ages has exerted the silent magic of suffering in legend and in art. Simon of Cyrene took the cross from the sinking form to bear it for him to Golgotha, and the women of Jerusalem wept. Christ was standing by the roadside exhausted, but when he saw the women with their children, the last words of sorrow for their lost ones rose from his heart to his lips. "Daughters of Jerusalem, weep not for me, but weep for yourselves and your children. For, behold, the days are coming, in the which they shall say, Blessed are the barren, and the wombs that never bare, and the paps which never gave suck. Then shall they begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills, Cover us. For if they do these things in a green tree, what shall be done in the dry? Drive the women away, spare him no longer, hence to the place of execution," the priests commanded. "To Golgotha crucify him," roared the people. The women were driven away. Another message from the governor was unheeded. The procession moved steadily on to death. But Mary did not leave him. With the few faithful friends she joined her son's march of suffering, for the steadfastness of maternal love was as great as her anguish. There was a whispering and a murmuring in the air, as if the Valkyries and the gods of Greece were consulting whether they should aid the Son of Man. But they were powerless. The sphere of the Christians' God was closed against them. The scene changed. The chorus, robed in sable mourning cloaks, appeared and began the dirge for the dying god. The simple chant recalled an ancient Anglo-Saxon song of the cross, composed in the 7th century by the skald Caedmon, and which for more than 1,000 years lay buried in the mysterious spell of the rune. Methought I saw a tree in mid-air hang of trees the brightest, mantling o'er with light streaks. A beacon stood it, glittering with gold. All the angels beheld it, angel hosts in beauty created, yet stood it not a pillory of shame. Thither turned the gaze of spirits blessed, and of earthly pilgrims of noblest nature. This tree of victory saw I, the sin-laden one. Yet mid the golden glitter were traces of honour. Adown the right side red drops were trickling. Startled and shuddering noted I the hovering vision suddenly change its hue. Long lay I pondering, gazing full sadly at the Saviour's rood, when lo, on my ear fell the murmur of speech. These are the words the forest uttered. Many a year ago, yet still my mind holds it, lo was I felled. The dim forest within hacked from my roots, haled on by rude woodmen bracing sinewy shoulders up the steep mountain-side, till aloft on the summit firmly they fastened me. I spied the fray of man with eager haste approach to mount me. Neither bend nor break I durst, for so it was decreed above, though earth about me shook. Upgirded him then the young hero, that was God Almighty, strong and steady of mood, stepped he on the high gallows, fearless amongst many beholders, for he would save mankind. Trembled I when that Bjorn climbed me, but I durst not bow to earth. There hung the Lord of hosts, swart clouds veiled the corpse, the sun's light vanished neath shadows murk, while in silence drear all creation wept the fall of their king. Christ was en route. Thither from afar men came hastening to aid the noble one. Everything I saw, sorely was I with sorrows harrowed, yet humbly I inclined to the hands of his servants, striving much to aid them. Now from the rood, the mighty God, spear, pierced and blood besprent, gently men lowered. They laid him down limb-weary. They stood at the lifeless head, gazing at heaven's Lord, and he there rests awhile, weary after his mickle death-fight. Such was the paean of Caedmon, mighty among the writers of runes, in the 7th century after the Saviour's death. Now, 12 centuries later, it lived again, and the terrible event was once more enacted, just as the skald had sung, just as it happened nearly 2,000 years ago. What is space, what is time to aught that is rooted in love? The dirge of the chorus had died away. A strange sound behind the curtain accompanied the last verses. The sound of hammering, could it be? No, it would be too horrible. The audience heard, yet would not hear. A death-like stillness pervaded the theatre. The blows of the hammer became more and more distinct. The curtain rolled upward. There he lay with his feet toward the spectators, flat upon the cross. And the executioners, with heavy blows, drove nails through his limbs. They pierced the kind hands which had never done harm to any living creature, but wherever they were gently laid, healed all wounds and stilled all griefs. The feet which had borne the divine form so lightly that it seemed to float over the burning sand of the land and the surging waves of the sea, always on a mission of love. Now he lay in suffering on the ground, stretched upon the accursed timbers, half benumbed like a stricken stag. At the right and left stood the lower crosses of the two criminals. These men merely had their arms thrown over the crossbeams and tied with ropes. Only the feet were fastened with nails. Christ alone was nailed by both hands and feet, because the Pharisees were tortured by a foreboding that he could not be wholly killed. Had they dared, they would have torn him to pieces and scattered the fragments to the four winds in order to be sure that he would not rise on the third day, as he had predicted. The executioners had completed the binding of the thieves. Now the King of the Jews must be raised. Lift the cross, take hold, the captain commanded. The spectators held their breath, every heart stood still. The 4 executioners grasped it with their brawny arms. Up, don't let go. The cross is ponderous, the men pant, bracing their shoulders against it, their veins swell, another jerk, it sways, hold firm. Once more, put forth your strength. And in a wide sweep it moved upward, all cowered back shuddering at the horrible spectacle. It is not, it cannot be. Yet it is, it can be. Horror thrilled the spectators, their limbs trembled. One grasped another, as if to hold themselves from falling. It was rising, the cross was rising above the world. Higher, nearer, brace against it, don't let go. It stood erect and was firm. There hung the divine figure of sorrow, pallid and wan. The nails were driven through the bleeding hands and feet. and the eye which would fain deny was forced to witness it. The heart that would have prevented was compelled to bear it. But the scene could be endured no longer. The grief restrained with so much difficulty found vent in loud sobs, and the hands trembling with a feverish chill were clasped with the same feeling of adoring love. Unspeakable compassion was poured forth in ceaseless floods of tears, and rose gathering in a cloud of pensive melancholy around the head of the crucified, one to soothe his mortal anguish. By degrees their eyes became accustomed to the scene and gained strength to gaze at it. Divine grace pervaded the slender body, and, as eternal beauty reconciles heaven and hell and transfigures the most terrible things, horror gradually merged into devout admiration of the perfect human beauty revealed in chaste repose and majesty before their delighted gaze. The Countess had clasped her hands over her breast. The world lay beneath her as if she was floating above with him on the cross. She no longer knew whether he was a man or Christ himself. She only knew that the universe contained nothing save that form. Her eyes were fixed upon the superhuman vision. Tear after tear trickled down her cheeks. The prince gazed anxiously at her, but she did not notice it. She was entranced. If she could but die now, die at the foot of the cross, let her soul exhale like a cloud of incense, upward to him. Darkness was gathering. The murmuring and whispering in the air drew nearer. Was it the Valkyries, gathering mournfully around the hero who scorned the aid? Was it the wings of the angel of death? Or was it a flock of the sacred birds which, legend relates, strove to draw out the nails that fastened the Saviour to the cross until their weak bills were crooked, and they received the name of cross-bills? The sufferer above was calm and silent. Only his lambent eyes spoke to those invisible powers hovering around him in the final hour. Beneath his cross the soldiers were casting lots for his garments, the priests were exulting. The brute cynicism was watching with wolfish greed for the victim to fall into its clutches, while shouting with jeering mocking, "If thou be the Son of God, come down from the cross." He trusted in God. Let him deliver him now, if he will have him. Thou that destroyest the temple and buildest it in 3 days, save thyself. Show thy power, proud King of the Jews. The tortured sufferer painfully turned his head. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Then one of the malefactors, even in his own death agony, almost mocked him, but the other rebuked him. "We receive the due reward of our deeds, but this man hath done nothing amiss." Then he added beseechingly, "Lord, remember me when thou comest into thy kingdom." Christ made the noble answer, "Verily I say unto thee, today shalt thou be with me in paradise." There was a fresh roar of mockery from the Pharisees. He cannot save himself, yet promises the kingdom of heaven to others. But the Saviour no longer heard. His senses were failing. He bent his head toward Mary and John. "Woman, behold thy son. Son, behold thy mother." The signs of approaching death appeared. He grew restless, struggled for breath, his tongue clung to his palate. "I thirst." The sponge dipped in vinegar was handed to him on a long spear. He sipped but was not refreshed. The agony had reached its climax. "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," he cried from the depths of his breaking heart. A wonderful waving motion ran through the noble form in the last throes of death. Then, with a long sigh, he murmured in the tones of an Aeolian harp, "It is finished. Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit," gently bowed his head and expired. A crashing reverberation shook the earth. Helios's chariot rolled thundering into the sea. The gods fled, overwhelmed and scattered by the hurrying hosts of heaven. Dust whirled upward from the ground and smoke from the chasms, darkening the air. The graves opened and sent forth their inmates. In the mighty anguish of love, the Father rends the earth as he snatches from it the victim he has too long left to pitiless torture. The false temple was shattered, the veil rent, and amid the flames of heaven the Father's heart goes forth to meet the maltreated, patient, obedient Son. "Come, thou poor martyr," echoed yearningly through the heavens. "Come, thou poor martyr," repeated every spectator below. Yet they were still compelled to see the beloved body pierced with a sharp lance till the hot blood gushed forth, and it seemed as if the thrust entered the heart of the entire world. They were still forced to hear the howling of the wolves disputing over the sacred corpse. But at last the tortured soul was permitted to rest. The governor's hand had protected the lifeless body and delivered it to his followers. The multitude dispersed, awe-stricken by the terrible portents. The priests, pale with terror, fled to their shattered temple. Golgotha became empty. The jeers and revelling had died away, the tumult in nature had subsided, and the sacred stillness of evening brooded over those who remained. He has fulfilled his task. He has entered into the rest of the Father. The drops of blood fell noiselessly from the Redeemer's heart upon the sand. Nothing was heard save the low sobbing of the women at the foot of the cross. Then pitying love approached, and never has a paean of loyalty been sung like that which the next hour brought. The first blades were now appearing of that love whose seed has spread throughout the world. Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus came with ladders and tools to take down the body. Ascending, they wound about the lifeless form long bands of white linen whose ends they flung down from the cross. These were grasped by the friends below as a counterpoise to lower it gently down. Joseph and Nicodemus now began to draw out the nails with pincers. The cracking and splintering of the wood was heard, so firm was the iron. Mary sat on a stone, waiting resignedly, with clasped hands for her son. "Noblemen, bring me my child's body soon," she pleaded softly. The women spread a winding sheet at her feet to receive it. At last the nails were drawn out and, now from the rood, the mighty God-men gently lowered. Cautiously one friend laid the loosened, rigid arms of the dead form upon the other's shoulders, that they might not fall suddenly. Joseph of Arimathea clasped the body. "Sweet, sacred burden, rest upon my shoulders." He descended the ladder with it. Half carried, half lowered in the bands, the lifeless figure slides to the foot of the instrument of martyrdom. Nicodemus extended his arms to him. "Come, sacred corpse of my only friend, let me receive you." They bore him to Mary. They laid him down limb-weary. They stood at the lifeless head, that the son might rest once more in the mother's lap. She clasped in her arms the wounded body of the son born in anguish the second time. Magdalene knelt beside it. "Let me kiss once more the hand which has so often blessed me." And with chaste fervour the penitent's lips touched the cold, pierced hand of the corpse. Another woman flung herself upon him. "Dearest master, one more tear upon thy lifeless body." And the sobbing whisper of love sounded sweet and soothing like vesper, bells after a furious storm. But the men stood devoutly silent, gazing at heaven's Lord, and he there rests a while weary after his mickle death-fight.